Yeah, cool. Thanks. So, yeah, I was just getting a chance to connect with Brad a little bit. As you guys know, I do some contracting and some work with the guys from Naval Special Warfare who he worked with, and one of my good friends is an EOD, and I got the opportunity to go out and blow up a bunch of stuff. And so we were rapping a little bit about that, and just kind of interesting dynamic in terms of actually how to blow things up. So cool stuff, and also get to talk with him a little bit about it. But let's open up for questions. I mean, it seems as if all of the talks are almost getting better. So, I mean, that was by far, I joked with him when I got up. I was like, dude, can you be a little less inspiring next time?
Yeah, no pressure, John.
Yeah, no pressure, because I got to get up and speak after this, which we should just end it here. But any questions for him?
All right. Since when you were growing up, you competed in swimming, and then you went back and you obviously competed at a huge level compared to high school and, you know, college and all that stuff. And just me thinking about it, obviously I'm not blind, but was it easier for you to focus? Because I know a lot of times in, you know, certain things I race at and that type of stuff, you're always looking over at the person next to you and saying, hey, all right, well, and sometimes you'll actually give up because, oh, he's too far ahead. You know, when you don't know, like you're saying, you're sitting there like, did I win, did I not? Is it easier as you're going through that race just to keep giving it your all because you don't know if you're first or last, or is it harder to keep that focus as you're going through that race?
I think it's a really interesting and compelling question, and for that reason, I really enjoy blind sports. You know, when you're young, especially in a racing environment, there's a lot of times where you see age group kids do this all the time, like they're doing breaststroke and they're like looking completely sideways because they're racing. Your coaches will say, don't worry about the other lane, like focus on yourself, because looking left, for one, is screwing up your stroke, and secondly, it's taking you away from, you know, seeking the best way forward for yourself. Like swimming's all about increasing propulsion, reducing drag. You know, if you can do those two things, you become faster and you get better at the sport. I think it adds a certain level of purity to it where there are 8 people in the swimming pool and they're all pursuing a perfect race, right? They're all pursuing the best length that they can do, the best stroke, the most efficient, the least crashing, the best turns, the best start. You know, there is a perfect race. You know, I don't know if you guys know this is a complete aside, but the name Pearl Jam for the band, what Pearl Jam means is like the perfect jam, the perfect harmony, the perfect drum beat, the perfect guitar riff. Like that, the band started that name because they were pursuing the perfect, you know, the perfect sound. So I'm always, every time I'm diving in, I'm looking for that perfect sound. Am I close to that? Not in any way, shape, or form. And no athlete really is, but that's what I'm seeking. And I like the fact that I'm competing against everybody else, but I'm competing against myself first and foremost. I'm looking for that perfect swim. I think it makes it nice. It makes it a very sportsman-like kind of thing. Like, I'm racing it, I want to win more than anybody in there. And I want to turn that flame into the thing that gets me going in the middle of the race. Every one of us is going to hit that moment. You know, it's really easy to swim a 50-meter freestyle because you don't fatigue. You don't hit that wall where you're like, I just can't do this as fast as I wanted to before. You have to hit that wall and go past that. That's the most compelling thing about sports for me. And sometimes it's easier to do that when you can see your competitor to the right. That guy's ahead of me, that guy or gal is ahead of me, I gotta beat him. I gotta find a way to dig in, and I'm doing it because I want to beat them. I'm tapping into this competitive adrenaline kind of thing. I think, you know, that's great. If you can do that, that's awesome, and that's why people like Phelps are some of the best athletes of all time, is because they're clutch. He's able to do that when it counts, and that's impressive in and of its own right. But for a different reason, I think blind sports is cool because you're really seeking that perfect version of yourself at that particular moment. If you cave to yourself, you lost. I would much rather lose a close race that I knew was my best effort than win a race that I knew I caved to myself. You know what I mean? I'm seeking the absolute best swim I can possibly do in each time. The outcome will be the outcome. I think blindness didn't play into that as much as maturity did. So I left sports for 7 years. And in that 7 years, I deployed twice. I did a lot of different things, a lot of different trainings, a lot of different conquering fears and all this other stuff. And I think it shaped me to be a lot more mature and a lot more experienced. So when I went back into something a little bit, I make that joke about, are you nervous to compete in Paralympics? And I mean, yeah, like going out in front and doing that sort of stuff creates nerves, but it's not like, you know, it's not debilitating nerves. It's nerves as a 30-year-old, you can turn into something that augments your performance versus dissuades you from being able to perform well. And I really think that's just because I was more mature. Blindness plays more into I have an advantage over an able-bodied athlete in that when I walk out from the ready room, I don't have to see the crowd. It's easier for me to do that thing where I put the little blinders on and I focus on the block, the lane, my race, on executing my race versus getting distracted by a large crowd or noise or glitter or all that other stuff. I'm able to vector in on that. But I think it's a really great question, and again, something I think is really interesting about blind sports.
Coming up there, Liz, hang on.
I've heard that when you lose one sense, your other senses tend to heighten. So have you realized some new superpowers in the change?
Public speaking. Yeah, and funny, when I should say this more in the public speaking realm. I really enjoy public speaking now. When I was in college, I was terrified of public speaking. I'm naturally an introvert. I'm a social introvert. I can function in a social environment just fine, but I'm introverted. I gain my power from being isolated and by myself. In college, I would get like sweaty palms and elevated heart rate and higher blood pressure over the thought of having to answer a question in class, where the answer might be, the answer is 3, but just even saying the answer is 3 just gave me like a freak out moment. It's taken me a long time to mature into that, and one of the things that helped get me past that is working with special warfare guys. Like if you go into a room of hard-charging operators who are gonna go kill Osama bin Laden, and as the subject matter expert in explosives, you go up and give them a presentation about IEDs and stuff, and you walk up there and you're meek and you're afraid and you're a shitty public speaker, they're going to walk all over you. And the information that you're providing is now something that's not going to resonate with them because you're a shitty speaker. So when I'm talking about stuff that might kill people, I have to walk into that room and project my voice and talk with authority. And I had to learn how to do that, and that's what's enabled me to become a public speaker. But in terms of just raw senses, what's kind of neat about it is if you take, in the Navy, we had to do a bunch of different assessments for whatever reason or another. So I had multiple audiograms. I have a before and an after audiogram. And after injury, even despite rupturing my eardrum in 2 places on my right side, my audiogram is about the same as it was before, a really negligible difference. So scientifically, I don't hear any better than I used to. But kind of in line with stuff that Dr. Tom said, and by virtue of the fact that I perceive the environment around me with my other 4 senses, they all become so much more important. And I have no visual bias. I don't have that loop of I see something and then I have to think about what I see. I don't have that. So it kind of frees up some other space to listen for things. So a great example is when Ian was doing the headphone march. I thought this was going to be real fun for me, because so often I go up and I give a speech and I'll end up facing to the right while I'm speaking. Just in 45 minutes of speaking, my feet shift enough that if I don't hear you laughing or anything along those lines, I have no orientation of what the room looks like, so I'll end up facing 90 degrees off of where I was. And that's pretty commonplace. And so as soon as he started doing that, I was like, watch, he's going to start rotating. And he did, right? Like he ended up almost 70 degrees off of where he started, which is really interesting. But in any case, when I was going through blind rehab, they would start to do things like listen for the echo of sound off of the roof. What? Listen for the echo of the sound off the roof? Well, I've never had to do that before. But if you listen, you can hear the sound come back up and down. So that gives me a great idea of how high that roof is. You can hear how high it is. Now, if it was a short roof and I snapped, you would either hear nothing or you would hear it come back real fast. So I did stuff like that. It's like, I don't know, Jedi tricks in a hospital where they would put me at a 4-way intersection of an all-tiled hospital. Imagine a tile hospital, cinder block walls, 4-way intersection. All the hallways go different lengths, and they would have me stand there and just tap my cane. Click, click, click. And actually, every time I clicked the cane, you could hear this. Because the sound was echoing in different lengths off of where I was. So we all know this scientifically. We've all watched like old submarine movies, and we understand the science of sound takes time to go back and forth, but you don't think about it because you don't need to. You can so rapidly perceive space with your eyes, you never listen for the echoes of sound off of anything, right? You're really only listening to what is a person saying to me, or where is the bar, or whatever your priority of the moment is. You're not listening for the echo of sound because you're not perceiving space with your ears, but that's the only choice I have. So I listen to that sort of stuff.
So what you're saying is that vision makes you lazy.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the gist of this.
Kinda.
I mean, it's kind of like as I was, I don't know if you guys did this, as you were hearing him talk and kind of going through this deal, did you kind of imagine, like, what if I lost my sight? I mean, that was, I knew it was happening to me, so I was sure at least one other person here was, self-serving enough to have that, like I was. And as you're sitting there thinking, like, all of a sudden going through, like, walking into a room, meeting people, perception. I mean, think about all the nuance that you pick up with your eyes. Even like, somebody rolling their eyes or their, deal, and that now you all of a sudden have to listen to inflection in voice. And you're like probably pretty close on that, being like, this condescending motherfucker. I heard that voice. Or you hear probably all these other things. But
I would never say it aloud.
and you're like, I've got a disability, but I'm gonna outswim you anyway. But I mean, think about, we default so much to the eyes. I mean, it's almost like if you were to rate senses in a way. I mean, it almost seems like your vision is number one, and smell. Or I mean, I just imagine, that. Like she said, all of a sudden other things heighten, but it's almost forced you to, probably almost reprocess and rethink something, opposed from, I would love to hear a conversation with somebody that actually had been born blind.
Yep.
And I'm sure you have, like, met people that were blind and they were born that way. It'd be interesting to hear, like, almost like a comparing of notes. Did they have to develop certain things, much earlier, and, that kind of.
The crazy dynamic there, I don't want this. These are rabbit holes we can go way down into.
That's what we're all about, dude.
Yeah.
This table is actually called the rabbit hole.
Oh, nice.
So just a side note, we did a Talk to Me Johnny live with Tom at this very table, and Tom could have spoken for 27 hours straight. Finally, after 4, I did this. I gotta go. And Tom was like, I'm just getting warmed up. So, okay, feel free to rabbit hole.
I'll try to keep it from going too far, but here's something that's really interesting about, a lot of what I do in the speaking space has everything to do with, like, wanting to impact people in a meaningful way. So either giving you tools or things that I've garnered from my experience that will help you negotiate your own challenges, or on the outside, change the perspective of what people see when they see. If I told you to close your eyes and I told you to say, or imagine, craft in your mind what a disabled veteran looks like in your brain, what do you see? And you don't have to say it loud, it's rhetorical, but when I did that a long time ago, I saw Tom Cruise from Born on 4th of July, like this angry, disheveled wheelchair guy who's just pissed off at everybody. And I didn't like that image. And I thought many people will see disabled veteran that way. What's really crazy is that if you talk to a blind person who is congenitally blind, they don't know what disability means. They've never seen it. They were born that way their whole life. They don't know what vision is. Think about it. Like, they were born and they had 4 senses. To have vision and lost it, I understand what I'm missing. And I can imagine what you all see. I can imagine what this table looks like. I can imagine what Gizzy looks like. But congenitally blind people just see the world with sound. And they're so good at it. It's obviously not as reliable as your eyes because they can't negotiate an airport all that well. But what they can do in comparison to what I can do is really impressive. The detail that they can garner from sound, they're the best at garnering detail from sound exclusively. Now, to your point, there is a hierarchy of senses, and I think it has everything to do with science. Like, if you talk how many neurons are in a small pin area in your eye, it's amazing. It's like 50 million to something or other in your eye. It's significantly less in your ear, it's significantly less in your nose, and it's significantly less on your tongue. But you do have a higher concentration of nerve endings on your tongue and in your ear than you do on, like, say, the palm of your hand. So it's a scientific thing why vision is so reliable. We get so much information from it. That's why it's the most reliable sense. But to your point, there's actually so much information that we don't always completely understand everything that we're seeing. So it's really quite neat, and it is really fascinating to talk to congenitally blind people about what it is that they perceive. Asking a congenitally blind person, these are very cliche, but, like, what does color mean to them? And a lot of times it's an association. Like, I talked to a blind professor of mine in blind rehab at Hogwarts, and he said colors are numbers to him. So if you say yellow, he thinks of the number 5. And I don't know why. It's just something that he uses to remember that colors exist. because he now has to fit a social norm. So people expect him to wear colors that match. Colors that match mean nothing to him, but if he wore the same black pants and white shirt every day, people would judge him negatively for that, because he has to fit into what the social expectation is of wearing, clothes that match, that are different every day. So it doesn't mean anything to him, but he was taught when he was 4 that this is how you dress yourself. And so he has to come up with this system of, I wear a different shirt on Monday than I did on Tuesday, and this shirt is quote unquote yellow, and that doesn't mean anything to me, but it means something to everyone else who can see. So I don't know. I think that whole dynamic is really fascinating. But when you sit with a congenitally blind person, you're just kind of like, tell me about this. It's fascinating.
The association of color for blind people was super fascinating for me. And actually, when I was in college, there was a blind person that I knew in one of my classes, and I remember asking them this question about colors, and they related colors to smell.
Yeah.
And that was the one, and I'm like, so what does red smell like? And like that, and that one was strange, because I mean, like, if I would say to you, what does red smell like, what would you think?
Roses.
Like roses.
Yeah,
right?
But that's visual.
Yeah, but that's visual. And like I remember she told me it smells like Christmas.
Interesting.
And I was like, Christmas? What does Christmas smell like?
Christmas smells green to me.
It smells green, like evergreen, like a tree.
But that's like my bias speaking. Like, I think of a memory associated with color to smell. Like a Christmas tree is green.
For them, it was like the smell of turkey.
That's crazy.
So turkey was red. And I was like, oh my God, like turkey is red. I love the smell of turkey. It's one of my most favorite things in the world. And like just had like all these different associations. Like a brown was fumes from like a gas, like a gas pipe, like exhaust fumes. And like it was pretty interesting, like listening and talking with that. And it was so perceptive for me that and I always joked, I'm like, God, we're so lazy with vision. I would have never thought about smells as colors. I mean, the number thing blows my mind. I mean, it's also people that are deaf or run into other disabilities like that. I mean, their perception of things is so heightened because I mean that's all they have to survive on that. So.
And I think that's the lesson I like to leave on that question. I love that question because I think there is a takeaway. The takeaway, and the reason I talk about that pre and post audiogram, is that I don't have super senses. Like, blindness isn't a superpower. It's definitely a disability, comparing my capability to either what I used to have or what a peer would have. But what I'm trying to say is my hearing is the same it was before I lost my vision. I now use that information so much better. Like, everyone has the ability to do that. And I love those exercises like sensory deprivation as it applies to sports. There are ways to increase your body awareness or increase, just your, existence in the world or your awareness of what you're around by closing your eyes and paying attention. Or when you go blow $80 on a really nice meal, well, close your eyes and eat a couple bites of it, because there's a reason that meal's $80. And it may be like the finest ingredients and stuff, and instead of just blowing through it, like take a moment to be like, wow, this, Cornish hen is amazing. You know what I mean?
You also had to eat some terrible stuff in Afghanistan, so probably came home and thought it sounds pretty good. So
yeah.
Anything else? We good? Or yeah, Harry?
Coming up, Harry.
I have a question. You said you were dreaming in color. Are you still doing it? Because I used to dream in Spanish because I'm from Mexico, and I don't dream in Spanish anymore. I just dream in English. So does
sad.
that go?
It's so sad, Harry.
I know. I gotta focus on that. But does that? You still dream in color after all this time, or?
I think there's a mix. So I don't see blind, and that's kind of off of the conversation that we just had. And this is an interesting thing as well. At some point or another, I don't know if it will ever happen for me. It hasn't happened. But I imagine when you learned English, for a while, you translated everything into Spanish for your understanding in your brain, right? So if someone said, hello, how are you? You turned that into, hola, ¿cómo estás? In your head to understand it. But eventually, after speaking English for so long, now you just think in English. I think I still imagine everything that I see. So I translate the table into, the wood grain table and this bevel, and I create an environment around me that's still very visual. So that's why I'm not as good at being blind as other blind people, is because they don't have that additional thought loop. They just see the sound. I think there is a clutch pedal, and I do think it's going away, but I in some ways hope that it doesn't, because I do enjoy, still having that appreciation for what is around me. Like if someone says a girl is wearing a red dress with lots of sequins, I create an image in my mind of what that it looks like. And now all my memories sense the loss of my vision are still visual memories. So if you ask me, like, what is London like? When I go back into that place in my head, it's all a visual memory. So dreams are kind of a mix. So when I don't know if you're, whenever you're reading a book and they describe, like, you know, a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a black trench coat with a white shirt and a black tie. I just created an image of in your mind of a silhouette of a man, a large man with a black trench coat, white shirt, black tie. But you don't, do any of you see his face?
No, I don't.
So I don't see anybody's face. I have like a silhouette in my mind of what everybody's kind of like general stature is, kind of like their sound profile. If someone was saying, you know, John's wearing a hoodie or whatever, then I would create an image in my mind of what John's silhouette looks like with a hoodie on. But I don't see John's face. So sometimes that manifests in dreams as well, where I'll be in an environment where all I see is silhouettes and I won't see faces. So I think that's like a step towards my brain is now starting to, you know, not translate everything completely. I just see the silhouette instead of, you know, in my previous life, a visual memory would have all of that detail. So maybe 10 years from now, I won't even see the silhouettes. I'll see just a voice or something along those lines. Does that make sense? So yeah, I guess it does take time, and you know, maybe I'm working my way to speaking blind.
So Brad, I'm going to just jump on that. So, do you have you reached like the Lionel Richie era where you're feeling up faces and stuff and get a feel for the face now, or
Hello?
what's the deal? Yeah, because if you want to
I'm looking for.
feel everybody's face, we could arrange that.
Yeah.
Just kidding, guys.
I wish I did that at one point or another to kind of, it feels awkward. I think the social awkwardness of it keeps me away from wanting to do that. I will tell a funny story about how it's Stevie Wonder, I think. So I had broken this metacarpal, right, in my hand because I had a metal detector that got flung out of my hand. So I had this like cast thing on my hand when I was first in rehab. Well, one of the first things they gave me so that I could hop on Facebook and talk to all my friends was an iPhone. And they attached a Bluetooth keyboard to my iPhone so I could type out emails to people, right? Well, my hand was broken, so I couldn't hit the P button very well. And as I was crafting an email to someone, I do this thing where I kind of like look up and kind of mumble to myself. So I was typing an email, looking up, typing, and then like every time I had to hit the P button, I had to turn my shoulder like this. So I was in my hospital room typing an email to someone, kind of doing this thing, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I get why he does that."
You mentioned before that you could tell that Ian had turned about 70 degrees. Did you know that because you were sitting with your sister and she told you, or were you able to listen to what was going on in the room and figure out that you knew that he was going to march and he was going to end up in a totally different area?
Well, doesn't Dr. Tom have telepathy?
That too.
We do have that kind of connection.
Well, Dr. Tom has telepathy, so he just implanted it into his brain visually.
Yeah. And now that I only have 4 senses, I'm extra receptive to Dr. Tom's telepathy. When the exercise came about, I was like, I know. Well, so Emma was actually asking me, like, I did almost all of that stuff when I was first in blind rehab. I'd have to go down and talk with a physical therapist, and they, you get balance is one of a huge thing that I had to adapt to because for balance you interpret 3 different data points. 1, your inner ear. 2, contact, which Dr. Tom talked about. And 3, vision. So like looking at the horizon is something that you use to stand on one foot. So taking that a third of your inputs away for balance, I had a very hard time with it at the beginning. A great example of this is the first time I ever rode on a tandem bike. A tandem bike's just a two-dude bike, lady dude, whatever, people bike.
It's cool. We're multi-dude.
Chicks can be dudes
Whatever
too.
dude you want, whatever. We're cool.
It was actually here in Ventura, California, the first time I rode on a tandem bike, and we were riding on this loop that it was kind of like in the mountains for 3 legs of it and out of the mountains for another leg of it. And there was
Were
a
you
really
on the first
prevailing
seat or the second
I was
seat?
in the second seat, so the stoker seat. Okay. So the wind was coming off the ocean in a way that our bike was tipped over for a prolonged period of time. But without being able to see the horizon, I had a hard time reconciling the fact that we were tipped. So at some point or another, just like on an airplane, a little artificial horizon, my brain, I'm leaned over like this, but my brain would turn the horizon back this way. And I got so tripped up, like my brain was doing backflips on the back of this bike. Like I kept tapping the guy in front of me like, are we still leaning over? And he's like, yes. And I was like, okay. It's so uncomfortable. But I had to do a lot of that stuff in the hospital where we did a lot of that progressive balance kind of work where, at first it was like, just stand on one foot. And like the second I would release one foot off the ground, it was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, okay, I got to work on that. And then it got up to where I was doing Bozu ball stuff. And then it was like stand on a Bozu ball and do a squat. We had to do all that progression. So as soon as he said, we're going to take the vision away and just march 1 foot at a time, I knew he would start to spin. So I was listening for it and I could hear his feet. And I knew that he had spun at least this far. And then I confirmed with Elise. I was going to say, it's really neat for me training now. I still do a lot of these movements and adapting to being blind. It's interesting because physically I can still do everything I used to do, and I'm as in a good a shape as I was in Afghanistan, from how many pull-ups I can do to deadlifts to bench to whatever. But lifting is an interesting constraint. An example is if I do repeat cleans, I don't know if it's my right leg is stronger or just the way that I'm doing kind of like the hop, I rotate about 5 degrees every time. So if I'm doing like a complex, I have to really pay attention to how I'm doing the complex because I can rotate almost 360 degrees through one set of complex without having any idea that I've done it. So actually, in my basement gym, I actually tie a rubber band to one of my feet when I'm doing cleans. So at least I have that tension orientation of where I am because sometimes it's another brain backflip thing to drop the barbell and hear it crash against the squat rack to my right where I was facing it only a second ago. I'm like, oh dear, like it's so confusing.
So got a little, Dr. Tom wants to, get up and drop some knowledge, right?
Uh-oh.
I was listening to some of the questions, and I just thought maybe I could share a few things. Like, based on mass of the neurons in the brain, the neurons dedicated to vision represent about 30%. So based on mass, you would say, well, it's not a big deal. But based on maybe cognitive functioning and input, vision takes up 70 to 90%. So when someone loses a sense, the number of neurons for the other senses, as far as we know now, do not go up. So if they had, let's say, 2 million neurons for, let's say, olfactory sense, and someone loses their vision, they don't suddenly have 12 million neurons for olfactory sense. But what does happen, though, is because you have less input from vision, that noise that you received before, you don't have anymore. So now your nervous system just has to pay attention to the input from the other senses. So that's how it gives the perception that those other senses improve. There's just less competition for incoming input of information. But as I say that, we also know the nervous system is very synaptic, so it can change. So at some point in the future, it could be conceivable that some scientist figures out how to measure neurons in a human without killing them, and they may be able to prove there's been an increase in these neurons because we know we could take glial cells and we can convert them into neurons. So we have these glial cells around the body. They're basically sleeping or senescent. They're not doing anything. So I was mentioning to Luke, it's been a long time since I've trained anyone that has lost their vision. And I know a lot more now than I did back then. So it'd be a really cool.
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. Like,
Tom calls and tells me that about every 2 weeks, which completely fries my brain. And Luke knows I have these notepads and I write down. And I'm like, everything Dr. Tom told us 2 weeks ago is wrong. And we all knew new stuff.
So, Dr. Tom, are you going to be the guy who figures out how to measure neurons without
cells.
killing somebody? Or how many people got to go before you figure it out?
He'll break some eggs.
So, okay. There's another sense that most people do not realize. It's an exteroceptive sense. So you hear about vision, sense of smell, sense of touch, hearing, things like that. You never hear about magnetoception, which is basically some people have a very low level ability to perceive magnetic fields. So we know birds can actually see magnetic fields. We can't, generally speaking. When you were talking about Bueller
Since
seeing
we're talking about
auras
auras last
yeah.
night, that
So
we
maybe what
have
they're
a
seeing is
mutual
magnetic
friend.
field. Yeah. So one of the things that may improve is not the exteroceptive senses. For people that lose an exteroceptive sense, they may have a better ability to develop their interoceptive senses over time. And this is the stuff that no one's really exploring. But Brad, when you were doing your rehab and training, did anyone use any signals, like any pulse generators in your ears? Did anyone do anything with hot or cold therapy along a calf or anything like that? You know, because that would have definitely facilitated.
This is the VA, Dr. Tom.
Oh God, that's a sad
Okay.
commentary. You know,
I understand now.
And this is like, this is where you get in this thing with like with Dr. Tom, like the fact that he's not at the VA, or like you know, it's not like, okay, here's your pill, get out the door. But I actually had a question, and I don't know how, you know, I'm sure you've replayed like the incident when the blast happened. You mentioned before that the Afghan guy that you were with actually got his legs blown off, so he'd actually stepped on the IED. And then when you came through with your metal detector, the metal detector set off the IED that you had?
No, I must have missed it. We go, like, tactically, think about you have the head of your metal detector is about this big. It's about the size of an envelope, you know, like
a shoebox, isn't it?
Yeah, like a little smaller than a shoebox, unless you got huge feet or whatever. But you're sweeping in an area, you're kind of going back and forth, and the idea is that you're kind of S-curving over the ground in a way that you overlap what you've done. Well, what happened, I'm in a situation where we have two potentially dead guys. We've got a very complex combat environment. This is why people like Andy on Friday, or we talk about threat assessment. We talk about being able to remove your emotions from situations and really think about, in any given environment, there's many variables at play. And in combat, you know, there's the thing that makes combat unique is that many of those variables are potentially lethal, from enemy fighters to the IEDs in the ground to just falling off of a building's rooftops, you know, physical damage, those sorts of things. So you have to be perpetually cognizant of all those variables, and then have to be able to order them in a way where I'm going to contend with this threat first. Once this is rectified, I'm going to contend with this thing, and then I'm going to worry about this other thing. I talk about threat assessment now because it's a great way to kind of manage stress in individual lives, just the stakes are different. But in that environment, that's a great example of a time where I allowed some of emotion and adrenaline to change the way I would have been doing that before. So when I'm sweeping for a patrol and there's nothing going on, I'm very slow, I'm very deliberate, I'm very cognizant of where my foot's going, I'm very cognizant of what's going on with my metal detector, what's the terrain look like. Well, I mean, we've got two dead dudes. We've got a helicopter coming in. I'm running up here. My adrenaline's sky high. I ran over this area, and I must have been sweeping too fast. So now imagine you have an S. If you stretch the S out, there's a lot more dead space. So I missed it. I just must have missed it.
And you actually physically stepped on it?
I physically stepped on it. Now,
So how come, I'm just wondering, like, are the IEDs different? So why did it take that guy's legs off, whereas the blast ended up taking your vision?
So it's a great question, and that's what makes IEDs so scary, is that they are all different. And even one that's engineered to be the same, because they're making them out of soup cans and like recycled motorcycle parts, they all function differently. Some of them, you know, they use this fertilizer explosive. You know this.
Yeah.
We call it high order. So if you have 40 pounds of explosive, not all of it always goes high order. Not all of it blows up. So sometimes it's a much smaller charge. Sometimes it's a huge charge. In this particular instance, I don't want to get into the weeds too much on it, but the IED, imagine like, here's your IED, right? Here's your pressure plate. A pressure plate is basically two pieces of metal stacked on each other, when if I touch the two pieces of metal, a charge goes through a battery and then blows up the explosive. Let's say they use these big milk jugs to hold the fertilizer explosive. You know, your typical milk gallon jug or so. This is my milk jug and this is my pressure plate. Most of the time they do this. They put the pressure plate right on top of the explosive, so whoever steps on it is the one who gets blown up. I was coming around a weird way where there was a big wall and there was a compound just to our northeast. And the pressure plate was right at the corner of the wall near the front door of this compound, somebody's house. And the explosive was just a little bit behind it by about 18 inches. And we suspect that the reason that they were doing that is our tactic, if we're going to go, a couple like assault team guys, 8, 9 guys are going to go into a building, we don't go in by ourselves, because if I walk through a door and I start going this way, let's say I track my rifle this way, well, what if the bad guy's over here? He's just going to waste me, right? So I come through the door and I clear left, the guy right behind me is going to go in and go to the right, so that if there's a bad guy over here, we're protecting each other's back. So to get prepared for that, we line up on the wall, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys or whatever, and then once we have an assault team ready, we turn the corner and go in through the front door. Bad guys are always watching, so they see us do that sort of stuff. So the IED I stepped on, I came at it from the wrong way. What was supposed to happen is a bunch of dudes were supposed to line up on this wall. As soon as they were ready, they were going to walk to the corner, and then someone would step on the pressure plate. This explosive would go off and then hit all 4 guys or so. Because I came at it from a different direction, and because I was by myself, I stepped on the pressure plate over here. It blew up in front of me, which is what saved my life. If it had been stacked this way, I either would have died or lost multiple limbs for sure. We saw that exact IED all over the place, just hundreds of them in that area of Afghanistan. It's called the Panjwai Valley. Within a kilometer of where I got blown up, I know 4 other guys who got blown up in exactly the same way. One of them is blind like me, Mike Malarcy. The other, Taylor Morris, is missing all 4 of his limbs. The other hit just a toe popper, and he only lost his foot, really. So it's just like there's a gamut of things that might happen. Blasts are crazy, and the tactics on all of them are different. So you go back and revisit a situation like that thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and while I admit a lot of times, like, it's my fault that I stepped on the thing, people cringe when I say that, like, oh, you can't blame yourself. I'm like, sure I can. It's all about accepting responsibility for your reality. It's not something like, I don't cry myself to sleep every night because I screwed up and I lost my vision, right? But I accept the responsibility that if I had tactically done everything I was trained, I'd still be able to see. But I didn't. I screwed up. And I was in a difficult environment where screwing up is forgivable. I forgive myself, but I do accept responsibility for the fact that I missed that with my metal detector.
This goes back to what you had said about when you're visualizing the room. Was there a point in time closer to your actual accident that you didn't do that? Did that come back naturally? And then my other question to that is, did that change when you were competing? Did you visualize it the way that you felt would be more beneficial to keep your nerves at a certain level, or?
Are you talking about visualization from like I'm living and I'm visualizing the environment around me, or are you talking about visualization from a performance standpoint?
The environment around you, like what you mentioned today with the table.
Yeah, that's something that came back immediately. And that was part of the problem was in the hospital, because of the drugs, I was visualizing so vividly that I had a very hard time realizing what was real and what wasn't real. Additionally, with the drugs, sometimes there's this like paranoia effect where Elise will attest, I accused a nurse on 2 different occasions of trying to kidnap me. And I made a big deal of it. And they were like, no, nobody's trying to kidnap you. And I was like, you don't understand. It's like, in my mind, I'm freaking out. Like, I feel like just people are like, oh, it's because I had these anti-clotting things on my legs, these like pillows that collapse every once in a while just to keep clots out of your legs. And in my imagination, because of the drugs, I was imagining hands coming off of the bed and pulling me away. And that manifested real. And then I told the nurse about it. I was like, someone's trying to pull me off the bed. And they're like, no, you're okay. And then I was like, you're in on it. Like, now I start to freak out. Like, help! Like, the reason that those hallucinations were so vivid to me is because I could see all that in my mind. And that was what made blindness hard at the beginning, was I didn't know that I was blind. So people are telling me, like, you're not seeing the bunny, you're not seeing the hands, you're not seeing the stuff. And I'm like extra freaked out because I'm like, now I can't even trust my own brain. But as the drugs started to wane, I'm now very rapidly developing a visualization in my head. And we did funny things in the hospital, like a celebrity look-alike game. And this is fun for all of us to play. I told you I don't imagine faces anymore because it's just like, it's laborious to kind of reenact that detailed of an image for everyone I meet. But originally I did do that, and I wanted to know what everybody looked like. So the easiest way to translate what someone looked like was to create these celebrity aggregate lookalikes. So like, this nurse is a mix between Cameron Diaz and Shania Twain. And you're like, oh, awesome. Like, so everybody, like for the first year I was blind, was some mix of celebrities that I would know, and that's a fun game to play. But I definitely do that. And then it is a very powerful, the reason I asked the delineation between real world and then performance mind, like when I talk to athletes or people who are trying to accomplish athletic goals or even any kind of goals, visualization is by far one of the most powerful ways to prepare yourself for that. Because like I said, when you go to something like Paralympics, Olympics, NFL, whatever it is, you get there and there's just there's a huge crowd, and there's media, and there's cheerleaders, and there's this, and there's that. There's like all of these things that take you away from blocking the punt or swimming my race or all those different, you train in the gym to block the punt or swim the race. You don't train to work with the crowd. Visualization is your ability to train and block out those distractions and really focus on execution. So I'm a huge advocate of visualization, and that's where blindness actually puts me in a place of strong advantage because I can visualize whatever I want. And as a swimmer, I count my strokes, so I can visualize to a really, really high degree of accuracy what my race is going to look like to me because I'm creating my environment anyway. So I can create it in advance, and then when reality strikes, I can kind of mold reality to be what I visualized in the first place. So in any reality that I'm going to be able to predict, i.e. like doing a race at the Paralympics, I can be prepared better than anybody else that I know because of my ability to kind of concoct a reality in advance and then live out that reality. The thing that makes it better is like when things come to fruition and then you realize a goal that you've been training for. When it happens in real life, it's obviously way better than the visualizations. But one of the reasons that it is so fulfilling is because you've prepared for it, you've put in the work, and then that goal came to fruition, and that's just a really great, fun loop to execute on. Did I answer all that?
Dude, that was awesome. No, we just put out a deal on in-season training. Over the years, we've gotten hundreds of emails about people wanting to know how you train for in-season. And for me, I just sat down and wrote a ebook that we put out. And one of the deals I was real big on was visualization.
Yeah.
And I looked at them like mental reps because when I got so many reps on the field, so many opportunities. And what I would do is I would actually imagine running out into the huddle, standing there, looking around, taking, breaking the huddle, calling the play, running up to the line, getting in my stance, ocular pat down every piece, getting in my stance, and then making a mistake. Like I would take a bad step and get beat, and then I would replay it in my mind, go back, and then fix whatever error I did wrong. And so I got to the point where I was imagining the worst possible thing to happen to me, and then go back and fix it. And then I kind of created my own reality. And that to me was, and I remember years later talking to somebody about it, and they were actually like, that's a very, very powerful form of visualization, that you're okay with actually visualizing the wrong thing, because some people freak them out. And that was big for me because, the NFL, like, if you're whatever your worst nightmare is going to happen to you if you let it. And then you have to be able to kind of work around that and then be able to go back out. But oddly enough, the one thing, when you kept talking about the crowd, in my 10 years, I never once heard the crowd.
Yeah, that's good.
I ran out, I played, like people talked about the 100,000 people, the noise. Everything to me was so deathly silent. And we were laughing about it last night. It could have been Dr. Tom's pre-workout neuropath. So don't ever take that. But that type of mentality. And then, I played with a lot of guys that were such high performers that they were so locked in on things that they noticed, if all of a sudden a guy's shoelace wasn't untied. Or I remember coming back on the sidelines, you notice, be like, dude, this guy's killing me. His shoe's untied. I looked at him like, you noticed his shoe's untied? He's like, you didn't? I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
Like that type of stuff. Or, I can see that the linebacker's eyes are green. And I'm like, shut up. And then I go after the game, like shake his hand. I'm like, God damn it, his eyes were green.
That's cool.
But there's people that have that level, and those guys play at a high level. But in the water, and any of you guys that have ever swam, the one thing I can't wrap my head around is actually you being able to swim in a straight line, because you don't have it like I did junior lifeguards, and we did all this stuff at the beach. And if you put your head down too much, what happens? You end up swimming off course. Mm-hmm. So the fact, like, how do you swim in a straight line? I mean, it's obviously, through repetition and motor memory and that, but I mean, is there any type of orientation in the water? Is there noise? Like, what allows you to swim straight? Is it just faith?
No.
Practice?
I mean some
force?
of it's maybe more hope than faith, but real quick, I want to go back to what you were saying about the visualization stuff. And I would say mental coaching is just like physical coaching. And I think we get on the mental side is where my passions lie. And there is no one solution for, like, I really highly recommend visualization. But what's interesting about what you said, you do a thing that a lot of sports psych will say never do, is visualizing a negative reality, because there's a lot of people who will talk about target fixation and say, if you visualize a negative reality, it will come true. And if you visualize a positive reality, it will come true. You express the unique mindset where you can actually visualize the positive and negative, reconcile both, and that informs your ability to kind of be very adaptable in a new reality. That's super cool. That's where mental coaching is like you have to understand the athlete you're working with and be able to prepare them. Some athletes can do that. Some athletes will never be able to do that. So it's not a one-stop shop. But as far as swimming straight goes, at first it was all hope. It was basically taking what I had done as an able-bodied athlete and just going for it. And I think that's why I was able to attain a certain level of success early on, is because I had no, just like the child play stuff this morning, I had no fear of what could go wrong. I had never really like wiped out, and I wasn't really afraid of it. So I just kind of went for it, and there were a couple times where I really ate it and was just like, oh, that'll never happen again. This was maybe like arrogance or something along those lines. But over the last 5 years, to really make that sustainable, I had to figure out how to be in tune with my body. And there's two things of swimming straight that I try to do at all times. And I'm really infatuated by all of the, when you guys are doing asymmetric diagnosis about, I have my right hip opens more than my left hip, or I have scapular tightness at the base of my right scapula, which causes my rotation to be wrong. I'm super in tune to all of that sort of stuff because I just want to make sure my movements are symmetrical as possible, first and foremost, that I am gaining traction in a symmetrical way. So things like in swimming, if the plane of your hand, if I twist the plane of my hand, now I'm grabbing less water than I was a second ago. So I want to make sure that the constant pressure of the plane of my hand is constant through the entirety of my pull, and not only is it constant on my right, but it's symmetrical on my left. So just the mechanics of my stroke, I'm trying to ensure that everything's as symmetrical as possible. Something that really, I breathe, breathing is an interesting thing in swimming, and a lot of coaches teach age group swimmers to breathe on both sides like that, because it teaches your body, it's kind of like rowing a canoe. You paddle on the right, and you paddle on the left. When you turn, you're creating you're either twisting yourself to the right or twisting yourself to the left. If you alternately breathe every side, you're kind of doing this inherently. Well, I don't do that because doing that causes me to go off course. So I breathe to my right, and then I adapt my stroke to account for that asymmetry, if that makes any sense. So there's the two things. One, making sure that my body is as symmetrical as possible at all times, and then also being mindful of the water flow across my body. So if I'm moving forward and the water is previously static to when my body goes over, if I'm twisted, the water flow will be different, right? Like I'll be able to feel it. My forward progress, if my body is listed at all or whatever, I should be able to feel that in the water. So that's another aspect of blind sports that makes it's really compelling, is that, in a world where you're swimming with your vision, you're looking at all sorts of things, your competitors, the pool, the crowd, my mom, the Pinterest, whatever. For me, I'm not looking at anything. My vision can go across my body. Like I can be looking in my knee. Does that make any sense? Like my mind is in my knee. So am I bending my knee too far? Am I flexing my ankle too far? Is my hip rotating in line with my shoulders? So all these different fundamental aspects of my swimming movement, my vision can exist on any of those points at any given time. So I can really feel, is my hip digging too far? Am I askew in the water, or am I behaving asymmetrical? And you said something in the Roth podcast a long time ago that I thought was really cool about dynamic flexibility. So your ability to do that when you're fresh and your ability to do that when you're fatigued are two completely different things. So while I'm racing, as I feel fatigue set in, I'm not, my arm stroke isn't as crisp and nice as it was at the end of a race. So I have to be like, is my hand moving out? Because now all of a sudden this is not as flexible as it was at the beginning of the race. And what happens to me is sometimes I drag my hands along the surface of the water to see if I'm near a lane line on the right side, I'll be able to feel it dragging my fingertips. What happens to me is towards the end of a race, because this is all tight and fatigued, my hand comes up just ever so slightly. We're dealing with 3 inches here. So if my hand comes up by 3 inches, I could completely miss the lane line on my arm sweep. And then if I do that, instead of grazing with my fingers, I may come down on the lane line with my shoulder, and that's way more of a wipeout than just grazing with my fingers, So it's like I have to be perpetually mindful of the stroke movement at all times to make sure that A, I'm symmetrical, and B, feeling the water, and if I'm twisting my body in one way or the other, I'll feel the flow difference across my body.
So does your coach actually coach you that way? So is there video on the water where your coach actually gives you that feedback, like, hey, I saw you rotating too much, or are you actually at the point which is fucking blowing my mind here, is that you are so hyper aware of your movement within this different orientation that you can actually notice the difference between your arm being up 2 or 3 inches, which most athletes never do. Their coach would be like, you know what, your arm looked a little funny, and you think, man, maybe it is a little funny. Let me work on that. Whereas now you're, that level of I guess just, proximity to things, but also that physical awareness. I mean, we talk about, one of the key fundamentals of athleticism is understanding how your body moves in space, and not only in relation to other people, but implements objects, balls, whatever it is. And so now you have a situation where there are these 2 lanes, and, your orientation is so, we talk about, I get another question quite often. People ask, if you were to design a training program for a kid, because everybody has this idea that there's this secret squirrel program that you can create for some future Olympian. And I always talk about like something that involves ball and sport, where, hand-eye coordination, something that involves different orientations, like swimming, which is a completely different environment than what we know, versus this vertical versus, laying down, whether it's supine face down, something that changes, multiple planes of motion, like gymnastics or tumbling or something that involves sliding with balance, like snowboarding or skiing or surfing. And so, like, as I sat down and started looking at like hierarchy of sports or things that you could teach that would be skills that would be, beneficial for athletes, this level of like physical body awareness in relation to not only the lanes but in the water is something I've really never even heard. I mean, you talk about, Austin's a pitcher, big kid sitting over there. He's kind of goofy looking, so that'll give you a little object. But Austin's a young kid that came to us, and now he plays for in the Rays program. But I would love to be able to, and I'm sure for these guys that do nothing but just throw the ball, if it comes down to the point where like something was wrong with that pitch, my left foot when I put it in the ground was 2 inches too far, or I took a funny step, or for some reason my right knee came up in a funny way. I mean, Austin, have you ever heard anybody, or have you ever got to the point in terms of your pitching where you start noticing things like he's talking about in the water?
You can feel the difference between like the grip on the ball, or the way you land, or if the hole's too deep. Like, every pitcher's different. Every pitcher has their flaws. And every pitcher bitches about everything. Like, the mound sucks, or the dirt's not hard.
Yeah.
So, even like rotation on the ball and on your hand, different spots and movements where you put the ball, like, you can feel it. You can tell I can tell when I fuck up on a pitch really bad, and I'm like, oh shit, it definitely slipped. So, yeah.
This is super really inspiring stuff. He was saying, he's like, oh, I'm not like Superman, but for me, having played at the level which I did, I noticed all of these things, but my things were so visual. Like, I could see, we talk about foot position, like the big thing with power athlete, toes forward. That comes back from the fact that when I saw a guy open his foot, I knew he wasn't going to be as explosive going vertical, and he was more, probably going to try to change direction, or he was going to be soft off the ball. So if I saw a guy all of a sudden his foot open it up, I knew he was going to be weak. If all of a sudden I saw a guy literally spin and like internally rotate his foot and kind of spin this way, I knew he was going to get off the rock. And I like looked at it and I was like, oh shit, here he's going to come. And like, you watch linebackers, same thing. The guys that were duck-footed were always going to be on their heels versus toes forward. So that little piece became so fundamental in our training because I saw it in real time, and it was something that I saw and would exploit. Just like, the show muscle, go muscle. If I walked up and I saw a dude and I was like, oh, he's in pretty good shape, and the dude turned and he had like these massive ass and hamstring and a big back, I was like, oh, this dude's going to kill me. Opposed from like this dude with, big front. But just all these little things, you just get to the point where you've done the movement so many times that all of a sudden you start noticing nuance, or you start noticing difference. And like, that's like with Austin, but just to be able to in that orientation and notice that, and it's almost like to not have vision and to be able to pick it up that fast. You're not somebody who had swum or had been swimming blind for, years. It was 1 year from losing your vision to that point is, dude, it's inspiring. You say you weren't Superman. To me, that's as cool a story as I've ever heard.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think if we're wrapping up, I think one of the things I like to try to put to audiences that every experience is worthwhile, and not everyone is going to gather like this. We'll call it a subject matter expertise, like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, right? Like you got that in football. I kind of have that in blind swimming, and all of us kind of have our Austin's a pitcher. We've got our niches, but also we have the opportunity to do stuff like this where I get to learn about what's it like to be a lineman or a linebacker, and like what are you looking for, and what kind of character attributes, physical attributes, what kind of nuance are you looking at? And then now I can take that into things that I'm doing. So like listening to the podcast about dynamic flexibility was something that I listened to and was like, oh, that made me aware of the fact that like in a particular part of my stroke, there's a reason my hand's coming up. For a long time I was just chastising myself for a lack of focus. Like I'd wipe out at the end of a set and be like, I gotta get my head in the game. It wasn't necessarily my mind, it was the fact that my hand was coming up just slightly, and it had everything to do with my muscle fatigue in the front. Now becoming aware of that, when I feel that fatigue, I'm gonna be like, all right, now I gotta bend my elbow back in because I'm coming back low. So I say all that to say, one of the best leadership lessons I ever learned at the academy, and this had everything to do with leadership. We go through life and we see all these different things where if you're a constant observer, you see great examples of stuff and you see shitty examples of stuff. The best thing you can do is always jot that stuff down, good or bad, because now you can take that, and you never know when that sort of thing is going to come in handy. Whether you're trying to figure out how to pitch, negotiate LA traffic, or order a coffee at Starbucks. There's all kinds of different things that we're all doing as humans. And I think our endeavors in sports inform our ability to be better humans. Our ability to be good humans informs our ability to be a good athlete. It's this nice cycle, and every experience that we do all comes to fruition in some way, shape, or form. And I think like any success that I've had in blind sports, it wasn't because I spent a lot of time at the age of 11 swimming. It wasn't because I spent time in the Navy. It wasn't because I grew up in Florida. It was all of those things. So I encourage folks to be a constant observer of the environment you're in, and try to take away from every one of those experiences as much as you can, good, bad, or indifferent. So thank you guys so much for giving me the opportunity.
That's amazing.
To speak.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brad. And just one quick comment going back to the celebrity mashup. Are you familiar with what Tony Robbins looks like?
Yes, you sound
John
like Tony
is a mixture of Tony Robbins and basically that's it. So he is a doppelganger for sure. But okay, guys, so here's what we got going on. Group picture, Harry? After John. Just kidding. No one heard anything. Okay, so guys, honestly, this was awesome for me, and I think everybody loved it. Let's give Brad just one more.
Thank you, guys.